Hi, Mindy Mandell here. In today's video, I'm going to focus on the fourth hypothesis of Plato's Parmenides. Now, for those of you new to the channel, I do have videos on the first three hypotheses, and you can find those in the playlists. But what I want to focus on here today is the fourth. Now, before I go into the text, I do want to review a little bit about formal dialectic, because if you see the structure of formal dialectic, then you can better understand the structure of Parmenides' arguments here in this dialogue. So we start with a hypothetical, in this case, if the one is. Of course, we can do dialectic on a number of different things, if justice is, if the logos is, if beauty is, and so on. But for the Parmenides, we're focusing on the one. And then when we take this hypothetical, we have four questions that we're going to explore. First, we want to look at the one in and of itself, what follows for the one in and of itself. And then we want to see what follows for the one in relation to the others, and who the others are, what the others are is up to us. There's a lot of leeway there in determining that. The third question is what follows for the others in relation to themselves in light of the existence of the one. And then finally, what follows for the others in relation to the one. So a return back to the one. So if we were to put it in pictures, it would look something like this. The one in relation to itself, the one in relation to others, the others in relation to themselves, but in light of the existence of the one, because that's the hypothetical we're working from, and then the others back to the one. And then for the question, if the one is not, we have the same basic four questions, except the third one, the others in relation to themselves, would be in light of the one not functioning or not existing, two ways we can consider it. Okay, going back though to if the one is, what we'll find here is that we can see the basic structure of Parmenides' argument here. So there are 9 hypotheses. Some people may divide it up differently, but generally it's agreed on that there are 9. The first hypothesis is the transcendent one that transcends all of the rest. And so we're going to let that one float away, and then we're left with 2 through 9. That means that there are 8 hypotheses remaining, and we have 8 questions if we take these 4 plus the 4 matching to if the one is not. And what we saw in previous videos is that the second hypothesis looked at the one in and of itself. If the one is, here's how it unfolds throughout reality. The third hypothesis looked at the one in relation to others, that relationship between the divine and the mundane, because the one is. The fourth hypothesis then focuses on others in relation to themselves. And the fifth hypothesis will round out this first set of hypotheses looking at the others in relation to the one. And then when we get to 6 through 9, we'll see that they match up with the questions if the one is not. And there's a certain parallel then between 6 and 2, because they are both dealing with the question of the one in and of itself. In the case of the second, it's if the one is. In the case of the sixth, if the one is not. We'll see again another kind of parallel between 7 and 3, 8 and 4, 9 and 5. Okay, so that's the basic structure that we're seeing unfolding here. However, he's not doing it quite in the way of always treating the others the same way or always treating the one the same way. And so he's showing something different in each hypothesis, although he is following the same basic pattern here. So it's kind of curious to see that. Now, what we're focusing on in this video is if the one is, then what follows for the others in relation to themselves in light of the existence of the one. So that's the fourth hypothesis. And here is the way that Parmenides introduces it. Now, I decided to switch to the Fowler translation because it was a little bit smoother. I started off making this video using Thomas Taylor, but he uses Old English and sometimes it's a bit clumsy, and it wasn't always easy to see what we need to see in this hypothesis. And so I decided, for the sake of smoothness, to switch to Harold North Fowler. The fourth hypothesis starts at 157b, and it starts with this question. Must we not consider what is likely to happen to the other things if the one exists? So we're looking at the others in relation to themselves if the one exists, in light of the one existing. And it starts off pretty easy here. Since they are other than the one, the other things are not the one. For if they were the one, they would not be other than the one. Okay, easy enough. And yet surely the others are not altogether deprived of the one, but they partake or participate of it in a certain way. So rather vague there, a certain way, what does that mean? So we need to keep a lookout for how they're going to participate. So here we are looking at the others participating in the one, but it's only going to be in a certain way. Now the others are other than the one by reason of having parts. For if they had no parts, they would be altogether one. This is significant because what we've seen throughout here is that we're using the language of pure metaphysics. We're not taking any religious language, stripping all of the religious language away. And we saw with the first hypothesis that we could look at it, the one, as God, but we tend to bring a lot of baggage with us. The word God carries a lot of baggage depending on our own particular upbringing and background. We assign different ideas to what we think God is, and what we're really trying to do with this dialogue and our whole studies here is strip away all of our assumptions. And so that's why we're calling it the one. But we do want to at least keep in the back of our mind that when we're talking about the first hypothesis one, we're talking about God stripped of all of those images, and so it cannot have any parts. It's beyond having parts. The others, however, do have parts. But the parts we affirm belong to that which is a whole. Whole falls short of one. In our metaphysical scheme, whole is quite high in the hierarchy, but it assumes a certain oneness, which assumes one. And so whole falls short of being one. A whole can have parts. But the whole must be one composed of many. And of this, the parts are parts. For each of the parts must be a part, not of many, but of a whole. And here he's making an important distinction that we're going to see throughout. The difference between one and whole, the difference between parts and many. What is that distinction? Well, here we have a bunch of eclectic things. We can call it many. They're not parts because they don't fit together into a whole. They're separate things. Some of them alive, some of them not. Some have other similarities, some quite different. They could be together. The person may water the plants or drink the wine, but it doesn't mean that they are parts of a whole. They are separate things, so they're a manyness. However, looking at pizza, we see that it has parts. It is a whole that can be broken up into parts, and the parts fit together into a whole. And so that is the difference then between many and parts, and this will become important as we go on. Then the part is a part, not of the many, nor of all, but of a single form and a single concept, such as a pizza, which we call a whole. And it is a perfect unity created out of all, and pizza is perfect. And this it is of which the part is a part. And so there he's making the important distinction between being a part of a whole versus a many that participates in the one. If then the others have parts, they will partake of the whole and of the one. So remember, we saw at the beginning of the text here that the others participate in the one in a certain way. And here we see again that they do partake or participate of the one, but they also participate of the whole. And we're going to see that the participation is perhaps a little different. So we have to look for it. Do they participate in the same way, or is it different? The things which are other than one must be a perfect whole, which has parts. Okay, so again, just tightening up his logic there. And the same reasoning applies to each part. For the part must partake of the one. And so now we're going to see a little bit about what it means to participate in the one, because even the parts participate in the one. For if each of the parts is a part, then the word each implies that it is one, separated from the rest and existing by itself. Otherwise, it will not be each. So the one, or the participation in the one, gives each thing not only its existence, but also its individuality, if you will, its separateness. You can see we can look at ourselves as a one. Well, everywhere we look, we see one. I'm one person. I have one microphone in front of me. You're watching one computer screen or phone screen or whatever. Everything is a one. It's an each. And so there's a certain distinction given by the one. And so that's another mystery that we have to explore. Is the one gives each thing its unification to allow it to exist, but also its distinction from other things. So that's another question to explore. But what we're seeing here today here is that the one allows each thing to be an individual. But its participation in the one clearly implies that it is other than the one. So again, just tightening up this point again. For if it were not other than the one, it would not partake of the one, but it would actually be one. But really, it is impossible for anything except one itself to be one. But since the things which participate in the one as a part and the one as a whole are more than one, must not those participants in the one be infinite in number? Now, this was a confusing point here, and the interlocutor did not understand this, so here's how Parmenides explains it. He says, let us look at the question in this way. Is it not true that at the moment when they begin to participate in the one, they are not one and do not participate in one? Few words I want to focus on here. At the moment when they begin to participate. So we're looking at the others outside of the one about to participate. That transition, that moment of participation. Now, maybe some of you are saying, hold on, this doesn't fit our metaphysics, because to even exist implies participation in the one. One is the first cause. The first hypothesis, one, is the first cause of all existence. How can they exist outside of the one? And so immediately we know that he's not talking about the first hypothesis, one here. He did something very tricky. He made a switch. And we're going to take a look first at what is the implication of the switch, and then we'll see why he did it. Okay, so there's some one that they are outside of, and at that moment of transition, when they are beginning to participate, they're not yet participating. So we have our manyness that was not whole, but when it participates in what he's now calling the one, then they're going to go through a transition. So that one must be a whole of some sorts, because it now has these parts, because they're going to participate in it. So we're looking at that moment of transition before they participate. What is the change that they go through when they go from being a manyness to being parts of a whole? That's what we're looking at here. They are when they're outside of that whole, they are multitudes in which the one is not. Are they not? And further, when each part becomes a part, what happens? What is that transition? Well, straightway, the parts are limited in relation to each other and to the whole, and the whole in relation to the part. So now they have this relationship. Back to our pizza. Each part has to be a certain shape, a certain size in order to fit in the whole. And of course, you can cut it in different ways, but all the parts fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. They have to fit together in a certain way. Each part has its own proper shape, its own proper size. If you're talking about people or states of mind, its own proper state of mind to fit into the whole. And then here's the result. And now we're going to start to understand what he's doing, because here he's finally tying it all together. So the result then to the things which are other than one is that from the one and the union of themselves with it, so bringing yourself into union with that particular one, that's not the first hypothesis one, there arises as it appears. So we're getting into the realm of appearance. It appears that there's something different within themselves. When they become parts, there's something different within themselves. And it gives them a limitation in relation to one another. But their own nature, when they are left to themselves, gives them no limits. Okay, we're going to break this down into pieces here. We know we're not dealing with the first hypothesis one, because There's a participation, a transition from outside of it into it. We cannot have that transition with the first hypothesis one. It's the first cause and the condition for all existence. So that's not what he's talking about here. What he's looking at here, and this is why I brought up the idea of God earlier in this video, is because if you have an image of the one, of the first hypothesis one, it means you have an image of God. And where you have an image of God that people participate in, what you're looking at is some sort of religious organization. And we're looking now at the state of mind that results from such a participation. And it appears that there is a limitation to one another. Each religion has its own rules and its own image of God, its own way of being, a way of being a good person within that religion. And so that is the limitation that you have within that system. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Some of you watching this video are Platonists. Not all of you are. Some of you just curious about this dialogue, but some of you are Platonists. You actually do meditate. You do engage in other theurgic activities, and you live your life in accordance to Plato's ideas here, and to what we learn about ourselves through our studies of Platonism. And so there's a certain, perhaps, comfort that comes from knowing that there are other people doing the same things, who see the same kind of value in these dialogues and recognize something true and good about it. Now, to the degree that it is a living theurgic practice that we're turning inward and constantly questioning ourselves, it's a very healthy thing. And feeling a certain connection to other people who are Platonists is not necessarily a bad thing, and it's not necessarily a limitation on us. This idea of a limitation comes in when you get into dogma. And that can happen with Platonism as surely as any other system. I think in our cultures we tend to associate the fourth hypothesis with the biblical religions, but of course dogma can set in with any system, Platonism, Buddhism, Hinduism, anything. To the degree that there is dogma, that there is certain expectation from the other members of the group that you have to behave in a certain way, you're going to find yourself in this mindset or the state of mind of the fourth hypothesis. The most extreme case, the most unhealthy case, of course, would be cults, but it happens in every organized religion to some degree. And I think that most of us coming to Platonism probably don't have a family who are Platonists, and coming from biblical religions, from some organized religion, we may still see some of that state of mind in us, even if we reject it on the surface. And so that's part of the purification that we're going through, is recognizing this state of mind in ourselves. And by the way, even those of you who do have parents who are Platonists, you may still have some of this in you as well, because there can be some family dogma at play there. So what we're looking at here, yes, is the group mentality. I do have a few notes to make sure I don't miss anything that I want to say here. So the group gives us a certain definition of what it means to be good and what it means to be a member of that group. And so that's the limitation of the fourth hypothesis. But now what I want to do is jump to the last part, because this is something curious, that in their own nature, when you're participating in the whole, you're participating in an image of the one, and that creates a limitation. But to the degree that we're able to participate in the one itself, our own nature, the soul, if you're looking at the others as soul, our souls in their own nature are unlimited. Now, as Platonists, this is what we're aiming for. We want to clear away whatever those limitations are that block us from knowing that unlimitedness. That's a big part of what we're doing here. So this is a very positive thing to us, but for people who are fully entrenched in the state of mind of the fourth hypothesis, this is frightening. And it makes sense for it to be frightening, because if you accept your group's image of God and of what it means to be good, and if those are the limitations you're putting on yourself, then to go beyond those limits, to drop those limits and to be unlimited, would necessarily, by definition, mean being something that is not good or bad. And of course, if your religion teaches that the soul is inherently evil or in some way is bad, then of course this is even more frightening for those people. If you follow this to its natural conclusion, it means that the theory of recollection is not compatible with the state of mind of the fourth hypothesis. And this is because the theory of recollection teaches us, shows us that our souls are inherently good. And we already know wisdom, but when we come into a body, the very act of coming into body blocks us from remembering that wisdom, and much of our spiritual practice is really just an exercise in remembering the wisdom of our soul, throwing away all the limitations that being in human form has put on us through being in the body itself, the physical body, and also the way we were brought up, throwing away all of those false beliefs that we were raised on that give us limitation. And so if you believe that the soul is truly unlimited, and we need to just remember that, and that's the theory of recollection. But if you accept this idea of limitation, that the appearance of God is what is truly good, then obviously that's not compatible with the theory of recollection. Or if a system does have some element or some version of the theory of recollection, it would have to be so distorted as to not even be recognizable to Platonists. So the two are not compatible. Now you can find, of course, that there are people in every system that do make their practice more mystical, more inward, more theurgic, and they can go beyond the limitations of their own system. And you can see such mystics in every religion, every biblical religion, every religion other than the Bible as well. And so you see even people who, even though the most practitioners, for example, in the biblical religions are in the fourth hypothesis, there are, of course, the mystics of their system that have gone beyond that to the third, the second, even the first. And so it is always possible. And of course, we as Platonists have to be aware that we are not immune to this. In fact, a lot of what we are clearing away is the false beliefs that we've picked up in childhood from parents who are perhaps in the fourth. Okay, the things which are other than one, both as wholes and as parts, are both unlimited and partake of limitation. So this is what I was just talking about, that we have these opposing currents within us, whether you're a Platonist or you come from the biblical traditions, or even if you're atheist, you have some opposite currents as well. Now, of course, here we're focusing on if the one is, and so we're focusing on organized religion. It doesn't mean that atheists are free of this, and in fact, when we get to if the one is not, we'll see secular versions of the same thing. But here we're focusing on if the one is, and so that's why I'm focusing on organized religions. And so we're all capable of that. We all have inherently that unlimitedness, whether you believe it or not, whether you're atheist or you believe wholeheartedly in a dogmatic religion that teaches you otherwise. It's still the nature of the soul. But we all partake of limitation to some degree, and that's something that we're all watching out for. And they're also both like and unlike one another and themselves. Now, the interlocutor Aristoteles did not understand this, so he asked, how is that? And here's the answer. Inasmuch as they are all by their own nature unlimited, they are all in that respect affected in the same way. So every one of us, the soul is unlimited in its true nature. And surely, inasmuch as they all partake of limitation, to the degree that we all partake of limitation, we're all affected in the same way in that respect also. So again, Platonists are not immune to this. And inasmuch as they are so affected as to be both limited and limitless, they are affected by affections which are opposites of one another. To the degree that we have these opposing currents in us, we have these affections which are opposites to one another. Then, with regard to either one of their two affections, limited or unlimited, they are like themselves and each other. But with regard to both of them together, they're utterly opposed and unlike. And now he wraps up the fourth hypothesis by just bringing in all the other categories, clarifying that the same logic applies to them as well. And they are the same with one another and also other than one another. They're both in motion and at rest. And since we have proved these cases, we can easily show that the things which are other than one experience all of the opposite affections. And so that is where Parmenides wraps up the fourth hypothesis, showing it as a state of mind. And we're going to see states of mind running throughout all of the further hypotheses as well. And so from here, then he transitions into the fifth hypothesis, which will be my next video. But I would like to know your thoughts about the fourth. Do you see it as something dangerous? Do you see it as something positive? What are your experiences? Is this something that's a big problem for you? Is it something that's not a problem? What are your experiences with the fourth hypothesis, and how does it fit into your understanding of Platonism and your practice of Platonism? So I'd love to see your comments below. And also, as always, if you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, I'd appreciate you giving it a thumbs up. And if you don't already subscribe, I do hope that you will. My next video then will be on the fifth hypothesis, and I do hope you'll join me for that.